Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. Finishing up, or at least this is the third installment, going to finish up here with the acute variables of training found in chapter 20. Today, I want to go over, kind of help you with rest intervals and training volume and training frequency. So again, chapter 20, this is starting, at least rest intervals is starting on page 621. Really straightforward. The rest interval is generally considered to be the time you end one set of whatever repetition range you're doing before you proceed with the second set. Lots of variation with this, but NASM correctly gives you some basic guidelines on how to do this. And remember, the OPT model is basically saying that you can progress people from this sort of lower level balance stabilization all the way up to when you're training individuals that are fit or athletes for power, right? Strength and power. Of course, there's hypertrophy, things like that. And they give you the basic outline for that. And for the most part, if you can structure your clients in a workout and kind of abide by some of these basic rules, you'll be fine. But the concept of rest intervals really relates to what your goal is. In other words, if I do a set of dumbbell curls for 10 reps and I fatigue at 8 and 9 and I'm unable to do 9 and I get to that 10th one and I'm pretty much, oh, that's about it. And I put the weight down. Okay, so I did 10 reps at a certain level of intensity that I could basically use the amount of resistance or the load that I use. And that can tell me a lot about how my muscles will respond to that set that I trained. Well, how long should you then rest before you do another set if you decide to do another set? See, there's some assumptions that you don't really think about when you go through the material like this. Rest intervals assume that you're going to do more than one set on a particular muscle for a particular exercise. That's generally not incorrect. But it assumes that you're going to be doing multiple sets, and not everybody does multiple sets. Why? Because it's based on what the goal is of your training program. If you are a power lifter, just as a for instance, then, and NASM says it down here at the bottom of the rest interval, these two paragraphs here. If you're a power lifter and you're trying to reach a max, one rep lift in a competition, then how should you train and how much time should you rest? Because you will do multiple sets. There's the assumption. And of course, the total number of sets is going to be based on, right, training volume and intensity. But how long should a power lifter rest in between particular sets? Well, that's going to be based on the load and the number of repetitions that you're performing. So the general understanding is that when you tax type 2 muscle fibers, particularly the type 2X muscle fibers. So we're talking about strength and power training. When you tax those muscle fibers, because of their inability to maintain high endurance levels or the ability to contract over and over for long periods of time, like type 1 fibers, when you tax those muscle fibers, they need a fair amount of rest time to sort of regenerate or recover from their ability to produce ATP and get rid of the lactate that built up from the set that you did. So let's just say I do 5 or 6 repetitions with a really heavy weight. And if you've ever done this, you know it can be really hard. You get to number 5, you get to number 6, boom, and you put the weight down. I'm showing you bench press. Well, there's a question. There's a question that needs to be answered. How much actual muscle fiber out of 100% of the muscle fibers that are available for use, how many did you actually engage while you did that one set? I don't know. Everybody's different. So the assumption is that you didn't tax enough of them. That's why we're going to do multiple sets. This is where we get the idea that lower reps require more sets. That's not untrue. I mean, there is a logic, a physiology logic to that. If I'm only doing 2 reps, 3 sets, even if it's maximum load for me, right? Generally, your nervous system is simply not going to allow for full engagement of a maximum number of muscle fibers. The more you train, the heavier you train for longer and longer periods of time, years and even decades, the better you are able to access more muscle fibers at any one given period of time. And that's kind of the idea. So, when you have new clients that are just starting out doing their exercises, the idea that you are engaging lots of muscle fibers in a short period of time simply is it probably incorrect. And so, what we want to do is make sure that we are engaging in the workout high enough volume of muscle fibers. We have to train them with lower repetitions if that's what you're doing, right? Rest and then do it again so we can hit more or possibly fatigue more muscle fibers. And again, we just don't know what these numbers are, what these percentages are, because everybody's different. So that then leads us to this understanding of rest intervals that if you're going to do heavy resistance loads or high loads for 5, 6, 3, I don't know, number of repetitions, generally going to be below 8, just as a for instance, you're simply going to not be able to access all or the maximum number of muscle fibers, fatigue them so that they will recover, get bigger and stronger. So what you have to do is you have to rest, do it again. And in some cases, do it again. 3 sets, 4 sets. That's why you see lower repetitions, higher number of sets. So you get the requisite amount of volume in your workout. So when it comes to rest intervals, then that correlates to more rest time if you're going to be doing more and more sets because you're using heavier and heavier loads. Remember, if I'm doing sets of 20 repetitions, 20, 25 repetitions, by default, what's the overall load that I'm using if I'm able to do 20 repetitions on an exercise? Well, it's going to be, obviously, it's going to be lighter, respectively for you. So if I can max out on a 300-pound bench press, I ain't doing 300 pounds for 20 reps. I'm going to have to drop that down to 200, 150, whatever, to do 20 repetitions. Therefore, because of that, I'm not engaging, generally going to be engaging the highest number of type 2, 2X in particular, muscle fibers. On the other hand, I wouldn't be doing 20 repetitions if that was my goal. If my goal is to get more powerful or get stronger, I'm going to keep my repetition range down. But if I do 20, 25 repetitions, how many sets do I need to be doing? Not many, one, maybe two. And in general, those muscle fibers that are engaged during those higher repetition sets are generally going to recover relatively faster. ATP um, production will get back quicker. Therefore, I don't need to rest as long. Make sense? Versus tapping into the fast twitch, particularly type 2X muscle fibers, they're going to take a little bit longer to take some time to recover from what you just did to them with the heavier weight, which means I probably want to rest a little bit longer before I try to engage them again. And so that's the idea. And again, that's the logic behind it. Certain amount of rest is needed. I'm just going over at the very top. Throughout a resistance training session to optimize recovery between sets. Not necessarily, because if I do a set of 50 repetitions, I'm done probably. I mean, I'm not going to be using very heavy weight, but obviously the reason I'm using the lighter weights is because I'm working on muscle endurance. I wouldn't have to do multiple sets of 50 repetitions. That would not be helpful or logical to do that. Again, depending on your fitness level and what you're trying to accomplish. Okay, but the assumption is that you're going to be doing multiple sets, and in general, you're in the 8, 10, 12, 15, 20 repetition range, something like that. That means you're going to have to take rest in between those sets. The rest intervals, time taken to recuperate between sets, exercises, and has a dramatic effect on the outcome of the training program. Each performed exercise requires energy. So The idea then, as they're saying, is that if you're doing muscular endurance, for instance, best described as the ability to maintain repeated muscular contractions, you're going to use what? Light loads, light to medium loads. Therefore, the general rest recommendation is approximately 30 to 60 seconds. Look at that. 30 seconds. Try doing that. In fact, it's a good idea to put a hard stop on your rest time when you're training. Try doing 15, 20 repetitions on a bench press. Put it down and then look at 30, after 30 seconds, boom, and do it again. Going to be significantly different than if you go from 30 seconds rest to 60 or even 2 minutes rest. And therefore, the idea is that for muscle endurance, you have a lower time of recovery, and you can go back and do another set if that is the case. And that's why you're getting the 30 to 60 seconds between sets. And of course, it depends on their fitness level, and you can adjust it. So remember, when we're talking about rest intervals, there's a fair range of how much time you need to recover between sets. Muscular hypertrophy occurs when the size quantity of muscle, yada, yada. Moderate to higher loads. So remember, endurance, low loads, ergo, higher repetitions, ergo, higher endurance doesn't require as much recovery time. Okay. Whereas as you start to increase the load, your recovery time, right? Recovery time is going to go up. Just keep that in mind. Endurance, not a lot of recovery time needed between sets. As you increase the load, you're going to need a little bit more time to recover because generally, remember, every time we talk about low, moderate, high loads, we're really talking about the type of muscle fibers that are being engaged for that particular movement. That's it. It's really that simple. And when you look at type 1, type 2A, type 2X muscle fibers, because of their acquisition of ATP through the metabolic pathways um, that they're using, require more time if you're going up into the type 2X due to the interaction of load, rest, interval length. Uh, Individuals may find it challenging to maintain a given intensity, which means you'd probably want to take a little bit more time. Maximal strength are best achieved with 3 to 5 minutes. This is one of the reasons why you'll see, if you're ever in a gym, you'll see the guys, women that are doing powerlifting or trying to work through strength, pure power. You'll see them. They do it. And they're not breathing very hard, right? They're doing 5 reps, 6 reps, boom, and then they're resting 3 to 5 minutes to allow for recovery time so they can now access those, again, those type 2X, generally, predominantly type 2X muscle fibers during the movement. Okay. Not 10 minutes. Okay. That doesn't make sense. And by the way, even in this scenario, 5 minutes, I've never had athletes, even powerlifters, I've never had them go more than about 2.5 to 3 minutes rest time, even if they're doing triples, okay, or getting ready for a competition and they're trying to max out and get their singles. 3 minutes max. Okay, that's just been my experience. But they say 3 to 5. You use their numbers so you can answer the questions on their exam. Power adaptations require, again, relatively long rest periods, again, for the regeneration of ATP. According to research, right, approximately 4 minutes, sure. Again, 3 to 5. You're going to see these numbers. That's why this is important to go over because you'll see these numbers on the charts that they give you, the tables that NASM gives you. And so if you're in phase 3 or whatever in the OPT model, this is the suggested rest interval. And there's a 3 to 5 minutes is a huge variation, but that's the number you need to know. So rest intervals can be really, really important for the average client. When you're dealing with average folks, average fitness or low fitness levels, we tend to give them a little bit more rest time in the beginning so they can recover and they don't throw up on you, to be honest with you, because that's what can happen. High levels of lactate buildup in the blood can do that. Training volume. Although volume is not a part of the 5 components of fitness, it heavily interacts with many other variables of training and thus deserves to be addressed. Remember, training volume, you can do training volume in 2 ways: reps times number of sets. Okay. Three sets of 10 reps gives you a training volume of 30 total repetitions that you perform. Now you can then add all of the exercises in the entire workout, and you can get a training volume per workout, training volume per muscle group. You could do that as well. So if you're training, chest and shoulders one day or chest and back, you can look at your total training volume for the workout. That's the way you normally do it because it's more appropriate to look at the entire workout because that's the exposed load that you've put on your body, right? So I try to look at the entire workout because your recovery is not only based on the individual muscle, but it's obviously going to be based on the entire workout. And that's where people, if they overtrain, it's generally because of the entirety or the total volume of training in a particular workout. But you can do it that way. What's your training volume for your chest? What's the training volume generally that you do on a regular basis for your biceps or triceps? Whatever the case is. And so training volume can be looked at from those different perspectives. Now you could also, and for some athletes, this actually makes sense as well, is you can now look at training volume, not just the number of reps and the number of sets, because essentially you're just totaling up the total number of repetitions that were performed. But now you can get a little bit more precise by adding the total amount of weight that you did. So not that I did three sets of 10 reps, which would be 30 reps, but now I can add this other variable of, well, how much weight did I actually use? Okay, so let's say I did three sets of 10 reps and I used 200 pounds on all three sets. 200 pounds, I got 10 reps, right? Fatigue through the ninth, whatever the case is. And if your weights change, then you could do those calculations as well. But let's just say 200 pounds. Three sets, 10, 30 times 200. I'm at 6,000 pounds, right? I did this many reps with this much weight. If I want to use just one number, the number is 6,000. 200 pounds for every single repetition over three sets is 30 total repetitions times 200 gives me 6,000. So that's your number, 6,000. That's cool. And then you could set up your periodization schedule to where you're trying to increase your total volume in weights, right? The total weights that you moved. I did 6,000 pounds this week. Maybe I'll want to move that up to 6,100 pounds, whatever the case. Well, I'd have to reverse engineer that. And instead of using 200 pounds, now I got to use 205 pounds or something like that. So these are some of the ways that you can use this information or use this method to calculate how you are progressing through your training. So it's often seen simply as a formula: reps times sets times weight. Sure, it has been reported that higher volume, multiple set protocols have consistently proven their superiority over single set protocols. With respect to, well, duh. Yeah, obviously. It's 21st century. We know these things. But don't get confused. Just because the science says that, who did they do the research on? Right? The average client does not necessarily follow as far as outcomes the same way with these type of protocols as even just an advanced client or a fit client, and for sure not with athletes. Why? Because of recovery, recuperation, and all the other stuff that goes into it. Um, Volume intensity, if you read that, of course, they tend to be uh, if you have high volume, tends to be lower, meaning the total amount of resistance and load you're using could be. That's generally how it is. The higher the intensity, the lower the volume. Again, if you're a power lifter, I use them as an example because they are at the extreme of load. Rest time is very high, and sometimes just one workout for a power lifter doing bench presses could take 45 minutes depending on the athlete. Literally 45 minutes on one, maybe one or two ancillary exercises thrown in there, but it's all about the bench press. Take me 40, 45 minutes to train a guy doing that because of the total amount of rest time and the need for higher and higher volume. based on their lower and lower repetition schemes that we're doing. So that protocol might involve a extensive period of time to train one exercise to get the requisite amount of repetitions in. And so it's just something to consider. So they tell you as volume increases, intensity is often reduced. We call that an inverse relationship. Last thing is training frequency. This one is really all over the board. Usually describes total number of weekly training sessions. Frequency is directly related to duration intensity. So if you're going to be training longer and longer, 1 hour workouts, an hour and a half workouts, you need more recovery time, general recovery time, meaning you can't train tomorrow. If you train an hour and a half today, you don't want to be training tomorrow. I mean, I know a lot of people do it, but it leads to a progressive overload on the body's recovery system, and you could overtrain. But again, a lot of this stuff is still controversial, even though we know for the most part, the average person, maybe 3, maybe 4 days a week. But I will say that as you increase the volume and the total intensity of a training program for clients, you start throwing more days in there, they will overtrain, or they will have joint issues, things like that. They need to recover. So general recommendations, table 24, beginner or novice, 2 to 3 days a week. Sure. Does it matter? No, your workout program is going to reflect if you're doing a 2 day a week or a 3 day a week workout. Intermediate, people that are a little bit more advanced, yeah, three, right? Four. And then advanced 4 to 6. Now you can also, of course, move into sort of the uber level of training frequency where competitive bodybuilders, for instance, who are using pharmacological aid, anabolic androgenic hormones, can train 2 times a day in some cases. Look, it's just the reality of it. And as long as you can recover, then you can train as often as you want. If you can recover from it, who cares? Then do it. Um, Again, the normal recommendation is 2 to 3 days a week for the average client. This is all academic stuff right here, right? Many clients will tell you, my work schedule doesn't allow me to train 4 days a week. I'd love you to train 3, 4 days a week. I can train once a week. So that's what you do. Or I can only train twice a week. But if a client is able to do it, then 3 days is really kind of the sweet spot, where you're keeping overall training intensity and volume at a level that they can recover fully, and then start the next week. And that's really what this is about. So when you read through this, don't get so over the top on having everything perfect with training frequency, training volume, and the rest interval. Just make sure that your clients are at least training. Give them enough rest time from one set to the next so they can recover, walk around, grab some water, and they don't hit that acidosis in their blood system makes them want to vomit because you didn't give them enough recovery time. That's one of the key things here. So, hope this was helpful. Just let me know by writing the word understand below. Remember to, if you haven't done so, subscribe to the channel and like it, and let us know how we can be of assistance. See you next week. Have a great week. Bye.